Welcome back to Not Sissicot News. This is a place where you can get information and inspiration for a brand new reality. My name is Natasha Rosewood. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a quantum healer, inspirer of intuitive intelligence, and author. Thank you for joining me on the show, and I'm looking forward to sharing some great information with you.
Hi everyone. I'm sorry to have to do this to you, but I'm going to blame it on the planets and the intense energy that's around at the moment. I don't know if you've been feeling it, technology, and maybe just the universe did not want to be doing this particular show this week. So we have postponed what we were going to do tonight was called Psychic to Psychic, talking about the gift, the curse, and doing some readings for you. So that will now be next week, Wednesday, July 22nd at 7 p.m. PST. So I'm very sorry, but instead we are going to be airing a previously aired show called Family Heaven or Hell, and 5 tips to empowering you in how to deal with either abusive situations or just being in unloving situations. We don't have to tolerate it anymore. My interviewee, Darlene Turner, did a beautiful job, and I think this is a very important topic. So we're going to be airing that show again tonight. But if you'd like to come on Psychic to Psychic, get a free reading, please email me and send me your question, and I'll let you know. I'll block your spot for you for next week. So sit back and enjoy this show. And whether or not you're in that situation at the moment, being empowered is always a good thing. Have a great week. Namaste. See you next week.
Everybody, Natasha Rosewood back here again today. Happy Easter. Whether you are of the Christian faith or not, this is a time for new beginnings. And today we are going to be talking about heaven or hell. While you're hibernating with your family, it might be going through some challenges. So my guest today is Darlene Turner, and we're going to be talking about the way out of abuse. 5 keys to recovering your inner power, and much, much more. So we'd love it if you join us, especially if you're going through something. Just come on this program and ask us your questions, comment, and let us know if you need help right now. So while we're in hibernation, many of us are going to be having squirrely moments, whether we're sane or insane. But what if you are living with an abuser? Maybe you are the abuser, or sometimes you abuse, you don't want, but you're having a moment where you just lash out and you're really sorry afterwards, or you may be doing this on a regular basis. How can you manage your own emotions so you don't lash out? So let's start this conversation toward healing. So I'm Natasha Rosewood, as I say. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a spirit healer, intuitive coach, quantum healer, past life regressionist, author, you name it. In the metaphysical world, it's all about healing. So this is a very big topic for me. It's one very close to my heart, because those of you who know me and have asked me how I became psychic, the short story is always, well, if my mother hadn't been psycho, I wouldn't be psychic. And while that was absolute pure hell going through that situation, it wasn't just my mother. And what I realized much, much later on was that she was part of a system, and so was my emotionally unavailable father, and so were my brothers and sisters who were bullies. They were verbally abusive. So I'll just tell you this quick story, which made me think of this topic. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, our whole family went on a holiday, and we stayed in what we call an English caravan, what you might call a camper or an RV in Canada. It was very small. And the 6 of us, it rained the whole week, and the 6 of us were trapped inside this small space. And my parents argued, and they raged at us all week, and it was just absolute hell. And I've just been thinking of anybody that's in this situation right now. I want to give you some tools to empower you and help you through this. And Darlene Turner has very kindly agreed to come on. One thing I want to say before we begin, before I introduce Darlene, is also to remember, and I've learned this in my practice, is that all of us have a 4-year-old child in us. Whether we're 4 years old or 64, there's probably a wounded child that's going, what about me? And I'm not good enough, and feeling very hurt and maybe angry and resentful. So when you are yelling or somebody is yelling at you, remember it's a 4-year-old child in them that's doing that. So if you can remember to have some compassion for yourself and for that person, maybe that will somewhat take the edge off it. And out of all of this, there was a happy ending for myself. It did take me a lot of years to overcome that abuse, but now I am happily married, and I have turned that lemon into a lemonade. So I've turned all that abuse and used it to create a practice where I can help to empower others. And I want to thank Darlene Turner for coming today, because she has done the very same thing. Welcome, Darlene, and thank you for being with us. If it's okay, I'm just going to read your brief bio. I know there's a lot to you, and I want to thank you for being such a brave soldier and coming through all of this. And you probably, when you're up in heaven before you came down here, you said, I want to go back there and help people. And they said, are you sure? You might have to go through a hell before you get there. And you said, oh yeah, bring it on. And now you're going, what was I thinking? I could have had a V8. Anyway, so Darlene has found the hero within herself through the trauma of 2 previous marriages. Over a span of 27 years, she has experienced firsthand what it's like being held frozen with fear and the tremendous courage it takes to leave that situation. She has been caught in the cycle loop and understands why it happens and what it takes to end that cycle of abuse. Now, through utilizing many healing modalities on her clients, Darlene is able to lift trauma and pain from the body. That's quite a gift, Darlene. She also works with shifting beliefs and the patterns they create to form a solid foundation of self-love for her client and self-worth. On a deeper level, Darlene helps end soul contracts and clearing all negativity. She empowers clients to move forward with confidence. Thankfully, Darlene is now happily married to her dear husband, Michael, who is the producer on this show. Hi, Michael. And they now offer free workshops called The Way Out, 5 Keys to Recovering Your Inner Power. But Darlene's going to be talking more about her workshops at the end of the show. The first step, however, is to begin the conversation about abuse so we can all end the silence and the shame. So while this short interview won't heal all ills, the first step to healing is to start the conversation about the isolation and the shame, right? To begin the empowerment process and to give you some coping skills. So let's become more aware of how we can take better care of ourselves so we can take better care of our children and we don't pass on this cycle. Right, Darlene?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So my first question to you, and I'm sure everybody has their own version of this, but why do we abuse each other? Why is it happening?
Well, a lot of it comes, like you talked about, that inner child. And when we witness maybe our parents abusing each other back when we were children, maybe we were abused back in those days. And I've talked to ladies in their 60s or 70s or so, and they're like, well, that was just the normal. Like, that was just how we treated each other. Anybody ever watch Archie Bunker? And those shows? Absolutely proves that, it was very degrading for women and very abusive relationships. And so that's kind of the foundation that at least my generation and that kind of growing up. And so then from that space, if we've experienced abuse, or in my way, it was very controlling religion. So it was very fear-based, controlling, suppressed. And so that was just my normal. That's what I knew. So when I left home, that's exactly the relationship I went into, because that was natural. And so from that place, a lot of times we just show up not knowing why we are doing what we're doing. And it just feels comfortable, but very uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
when we kind of get into that, the person that is doing the abuse a lot of times has this built up frustration or this, feeling hurt way back from a child, like you said, and doesn't know how to release those emotions and in a healthy way and work through it. So they get aggressive at other people. So
Yeah.
one way for sure is huge.
So it's kind of generational then. It gets passed down
Yeah,
through the generations. Yeah.
learned behavior. And also that a lot of times there can be mental issues. And I truly, as I look back to my first husband, I really believed he did have a mental issue. And so that's another reason. Another reason is alcohol is huge, right? That's the way spirits get in. And
Yes. Yeah. Well, my mother, I come from an English background, as you know, and the English, even today, I notice when I go back, I go, wow, English people are really mean to each other. Some of it's kind of couched in humor, and that's great if it really is coming from a teasing, loving place. But I know growing up, it was very difficult for me because, uh, like you say, it was kind of in the culture. And my mother would say, oh, they're just teasing you. But it hurt. It really hurt. And years later, we found out that my mother did become an alcoholic. She was very psychic and she was very psycho. And I think now they would maybe analyze her as having had a personality disorder. But what was difficult for me, and this kind of leads into a later question, but she was so charming to everybody else. And if I could never say anything against her, because people would say, oh, your mother's so lovely. And I go, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, I tried in the beginning saying, oh, she's a bitch, this, that. And I'd be like, I just couldn't fight back. There was no way to fight back, and nobody was there to support me. So I was really on my own. So does that come up a lot? These people are very charming on the outside, but really abusive on the inside.
yeah, that's kind of how I got sucked into my first marriage and the second one, actually. It was that they were charming. I was very young on my first marriage. And
Uh-oh. Have we frozen, Darlene? Okay, I think we're losing contact with Darlene. So I'm just going to carry on talking for a while. I think Michael can probably fix that. And so my question had been to Darlene, where does the abuse begin? And we talked about generational stuff. And I know as a psychic, when I get a lot of clients who come to me, I will notice that their issues have started with the ancestors, and I will often feel the spirits of their ancestors around my client, and I will say, if you work on healing this, whether it's an addiction, alcohol, or it's an abusive kind of disposition, or something that's been passed on down the family, which we all have family issues that travel down through the lineage. It's kind of like the DNA of our soul. And until you really work on that, you become aware of it. Like Darlene was saying, I think a lot of time we're unconsciously abusing or unconsciously allowing ourselves to be abused because that's what's familiar to us. We need to first wake up to the fact that this is not good. This is not healthy. It can feel familiar, but it's not comfortable, like Darlene said. So it's very important that we all become awake to our behaviors. We may want to check in, especially at this time as we're going through this hibernation, of how am I behaving in my family? You may want to sit around the table at night and say, hey, am I saying anything that hurts you or that irritates you? Because it works, there's a two-way street here. And this might be an opportunity for a really healing time. And what happened in my family too, because I was number 4 out of 5 children, that abuse kind of traveled down. So I was very aware that my grandfather, my mother's father, was very cruel and would put my mother down all the time and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not as good as your mother. And then outside of the home, he would brag about his daughter. But my mother didn't know that. So she almost grew up with a split personality where she felt the imposter self was this charming, brilliant, pretty woman, but the inner self was nothing, that she was not good enough, she was worthless. And a lot of abusers and abusees will have that sense of feeling like nothing because that's what they've been told who they are. So hopefully we can get Darlene back. I suspect that they've lost their Wi-Fi, so I'm just going to carry on. So what are the signs of an abuser when you meet somebody? And because my mother was an alcoholic, and this is when I was much younger, unconscious, I did go to Children of Alcoholics, Al-Anon, and I learned that probably I would either marry out an alcoholic or become an alcoholic. And I was in my mid-30s before I even knew that my mother was an alcoholic. I thought alcoholic were people that were just down in the bad part of town and falling about red-faced and drunk. And I didn't realize how sophisticated and sneaky alcoholics can be. I used to find bottles of sherry in the laundry basket. Well, what's that doing there? And it was my mother, due to her shame, hiding that. So what are the signs that you're going to be with an abuser? Very early on in relationships, at least romantic relationships, they'll often be very charming. Like I said, they're often very brilliant. Abusers are very brilliant. And they will often be very complimentary and be amazing and be very attentive to you. But then slowly you might notice that there's a kind of a passive aggressive humor, or there might be a jealousy, or they might be criticizing how you look. Hi, Darlene. Glad to have you back. Can you hear me?
I don't know what happened, but yeah, I'm back.
I've just been hopefully not talking to myself, but talking to my audience. So I was still on the, and I'll let you take over from this. I was saying, what are the signs of an abuser? And I know, having come from my mother having been an alcoholic, that I was attracted. I did end up with people that drank a lot. So can you take over from there?
Yeah, well, some of the signs are definitely rudeness to others, changes when drinking, and definitely it's kind of all about them, you know, and their feelings, what's going on, and it seems like it's almost like we're serving them in so many ways of trying to keep them, you know, don't get angry, keeping the peace, keeping things running smoothly. And then, you know, if they do get angry, then they're like usually turn to you and say, you know, if you wouldn't have done this and that, and then you just kind of feel like, oh, it's my own fault. I'll try harder. I'll do better. And that's kind of a big chunk of the cycle. And when that happens, we just feel powerless in those relationships. And for me, it was a huge fear base. I was terrified to leave because he threatened me that, you know, that would pretty much be my life if I left. And early on in the stages of the relationship, I had heard on the news about a women's shelter that the man went in and shot the woman right in the shelter.
Oh
so right off the bat, I think I was maybe 17 when I heard that. It was just like, there's just not an option to go to a shelter. The one time I did call the police, he just brought my daughter out in his arms and he's like, oh, honey, you know, you're just overreacting. Look, you woke up the baby, and, you know, and so they just laughed like they are.
Very sneaky, right? Very sneaky.
Yeah.
And I want to talk just a little bit here about, you know, when I'm talking about manifestation, and people are always asking me, Natasha, when am I going to meet my soulmate? And I always say, well, like attracts like. Mm-hmm. So, or complementary energy. So I always look at the victim and the abuser, and to me, that's complementary energy. So the abuser is always looking for somebody that is already maybe feeling a little powerless, or not as good as, or not good enough. And they kind of pick on those. So how can you, if you're feeling not worthy and you're aware that you're attracting, I want to say, these bullies or abuser type people, how can you kind of protect yourself from that? You got any suggestions for that?
Well, I really recommend people just starting with a relationship with themselves, because that's once I finally got out of that cycle and I found, I call it my Buddha up the mountain. And I spent 5-6 years there, and I just meditated. I got to know who I was, because we lose ourselves in these relationships, and we're just so busy trying to keep the peace, the calm, and so a big part of it is just fall in love with ourselves and really get to know ourselves and work on those things that like create that codependency in relationships, so that we can come into a relationship not even feeling like we need to be in a relationship, because a lot of times people go into a relationship thinking, oh, this person's going to complete me, or this person is this and that, and I need that, right? So be able to give ourselves what we're looking for on the outside, because like you mentioned, how it is on the inside is a reflection on the outside. So if you have all these abandonment issues and worth issues and all these things that are the basis of how we show up in life, then those are the people that are going to come in and show it to us so that we have a chance to overcome it, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, the big question is, Natasha, when am I going to meet my soulmate? And I say, well, when you're ready. And I say, well, how will I know? They ask, how will I know when I'm ready? I said, when your soulmate appears. Because when you're in the right frequency and I call it the authentic self. And I went through that same thing for years. Oh, I've got to find Prince Charming. He's going to save me. He's going to complete me. I'll be happy then. Right. Mm-hmm. And then when I finally gave up and went, oh, that's never going to work. I'm just going to carry on, do my life. That's when my wonderful husband showed up. And that was pretty late on. So I was a bit of a slow learner. As my brother said, a late learner. So I know there's a horrendous amount of statistics. The statistics are very high about the numbers of abuse. And while we call them statistics, which is a horrible word to say, by the way, we're talking about people's stories. So, but just for the sake of this show, what are the numbers?
Okay,
well, people who are abused.
Some of it written down here, but I just want to talk about most recent. This winter, I don't hardly ever listen to the news. And just this one day, I decided, I was in my grandson's room and he had a TV. I was like, I'm going to put it on the news. And wouldn't you know it, I catch this one piece about domestic violence in Alberta. They had turned away 23,000 women last year because they didn't have enough room in their shelter. So that was a huge eye opener for me, for those women that finally have the courage to like get out of this relationship,
yes,
and get help and be turned down. Like you can kind of understand how so many end up homeless, or, because it's just, if you're out, there's not an option to go back, because, the repercussions of leaving in the first place can be pretty horrendous. And a lot of those statistics are women running for their lives or fleeing for their lives. So I wanted to bring that up. It says, when I did look up the statistics for the show, it said 24 people per minute are victims of rape or physical violence. And I think this may be around the world, or they could have been just Canada or US. 50% of women and 4% of men have been injured. That's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime.
Wow.
So it's pretty huge. And then children of witness violence is 22%. Nearly 1 in 4 are filed in courts. Now, these numbers are even scarier because there's only 1/3 of them actually reported. So there's so much that they just don't even get reported or go to the police, because like we kind of talked about, there's so much shame and guilt and wrapped around it, right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I know my mother was really at her worst. I felt very ashamed. I came from a middle class family in England, and in England you either sane or you're a dingbat, you're nuts. And so I wasn't about to admit that my mother was a Looney Tune, because there was kind of a stigma then about that. And although there's a lot more information out there, I think it's still very kind of, I want to say, humiliating to kind of come forth, admit that, you've got this going on in your family. But to me, it feels like it's more common than people living in a healthy family environment.
Well, you know, and I've been doing these workshops, and it's pretty surprising how many people say, "Oh, I wanted to show up," or, you know, but our numbers have been low just for the fact that I think a lot of people think, well, I haven't physically been abused, so, you know, it doesn't really count, you know, but emotional and mental abuse are just as bad as physical abuse. And
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
a clear understanding around that.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I did the same thing. You know, I was hearing stories in workshops of women being raped or being beaten or locked in a room for days, and went, oh, you know, my mother was a bit mean to me. It was nothing, but I didn't realize the damage the verbal and the cruelty had done. And I was probably in my mid-40s before I really got over it. Really got over it. And, you know, I went for counseling. When I came to Canada, thank God for Canada, because I had to emigrate to get away from my mother. It's like there's an ocean between us, and finally I felt like, thank God I'm safe. And then I started the healing process, but I realized in my 30s I was in a state of PTSD. I was sleeping, and I couldn't function, and you know, I kept remembering her voice was still very fresh in my head, and I kept thinking, oh, it wasn't that bad, Natasha, you know, get over yourself. But you know, it's not about comparing your pain to other people, because it is what it is to you. And I did lose my whole family. You know, I lost my whole family because of that, because it was like a bomb dropped in the middle, and we all scattered to the four winds. And so it was very sad, actually. So it's not about comparing how bad was your story to somebody else's. It is what it is to you. And plus, we all have a different kind of emotional and mental makeup in how we deal with these things.
Yeah.
And you know, what do you think? I'm just going to ask you this question. What was it for you that finally gave you the courage to kind of say, okay, I'm really done now, I'm out of here?
Well, I want to just break it up into two, because the first marriage, I stayed 17 years, and I'm talking, I was frozen with fear. Like, it was at this point where I couldn't even, I had my youngest daughter in the bedroom with me, and we were shaking so bad. He was freaking right out on my oldest daughter. She was about 14. And I could not leave that room to go and defend her. And because of the level of fear that I had experienced in the 17 years. And so in that terror and in that night is when I actually was able to tap into my courage and say, enough, I can't do this. And so I was able to call the police and finally walk through that fire of fear and get out. And then it was like he lost all the power. It was just like I got on the other side, and it was just like, whoo, clear air, you know, just a whole different feeling. But then when I went into that repeated cycle of the second one, all the signs were there, and somehow I just like, oh, he'll change, he'll get better, he's going to go to AA, he's getting counseling, you know, whatever. And you know, it come to a point that I read actually Wayne Dyer's book of inspiration, and I don't know if you've ever read a book that changed everything. Well, that book was it for me. And I just like realized how I had based my whole life on fear, and how I was repeating this pattern, and I tapped into this love and reconnected, because I had shut the door on God because of the religion as a childhood. So I was still having a little issues using the word God, but I could do source and I could do divine. And once I did that, I went back, like, because I read the book on a camping trip, and I went back in home and went into the relationship, and I didn't fit anymore because I had changed. I had found my value in that self-love, and it was just like, okay, it doesn't work anymore. So I was able to get out. So yeah.
That's beautiful, those turning points. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because I've been reading spiritual books, and have been reading spiritual books probably since I was 15, anything on metaphysics. And I was trying to figure it out, why is my mother, you know, behaving the way she is, and why is this happening to our family? And it wasn't until I was about 35, living in Kitsilano in Vancouver, and one Sunday afternoon I was watching this show on PBS, John Bradshaw. And he, to me, I would have kissed the man if I could have leapt into that TV screen, because he explained that we're all part of the system. My mother had been saying, it's all your fault, it's all your fault. And I was walking around with this big thing on my back going, oh my God, I'm just wicked, and I'm nasty and evil, and I've caused all this horrible chaos. And then he said, no, it's that we're in a system. And we, as human beings, adapt to the system. So the victim walks on eggshells, so not to upset the, the abuser. And even the abuser is adapting to the system by going, oh, there's a victim there. And poof, we come together. So it's like, until you break that system, which is what you did, which is so amazing, it's going to stay the same.
Yeah.
I say nothing changes until you change.
Yeah.
How you think and how you behave, right? So I congratulate you, darling, because it is still a very courageous thing to do, especially if you've been, brought up in that environment. So we all know that the numbers are very high. How does abuse affect people physically and emotionally? And I want to say psychically too.
Well, if you've experienced trauma physically, this can get locked into our bodies and cause chronic pain. And also our body is usually telling us a message. So within my first marriage and some of my second, I had huge lower back issues, like literally laying on the floor 6 months, twice, 2 years in a row, trying to tell me I don't have that support. It's my root, it's my foundation, it's fear, right? And so definitely this message is coming from the body when we have that chronic pain and trauma being stuck there in the cellular level of any kind of abuse to the body. So that's one thing around the abuse. And then psychologically and emotionally, that basis of living in fear and terror, it really escalates our nervous system. So we have a harder time just staying calm. A lot of times it's easy to get triggered. Just a sound, for me, it was cowboy boots going up and down the hallway and me being in a room, right? So that happens. And also just we have low confidence or self-esteem. So it's kind of like we shy away from being able to stand in who we are and have that confidence and that inner power. And yeah, all of that kind of leads up to how we're showing up in life, like I mentioned before.
Yeah, because I tell people, I joke about it. My mother had been psycho and be psychic, but I feel like I was always on fight or flight. Like, I was tuned in to my mother's moods, and I could tell her patterns. And she's going to blow in like about 15 minutes. I could really time it, and my body would start to freeze up. Do you have any suggestions? I know we're going to go into this a bit more later, but do you have any little tools that you can give people that are dealing with that kind of, apart from running like hell, to deal with that in the moment?
Well, definitely, if you are in a violent situation, get out. Like, yes. Literally, like I was so many times when he held my life in his hands, and to stay is just, so I'm so lucky I got out, because literally he committed murder a year later. So it was definitely possible. So that's one thing is if you're in that much, get out, just wherever, go to a friend's, your parents, to a shelter, just reach out. And then the next thing is, if it's not quite so bad and it's, you're working through some stuff, calming the nervous system down. One of the tools that was so valuable to me was finding my happy place. And my happy place is locking myself in the bathroom and running a huge tub of water and just soaking in that hot water and calming my nervous system down. That was one of my biggest tools. Sometimes if you can just get away, go for a walk, get in nature, down by a lake, like all of that really helps clear. Lay on the ground, lean against a tree. Trees really recycle our stuff and help relieve a lot of the pain, even chronic pain, like we talked about, leaning against the so grounding, that helps. Definitely getting some sessions done and working on that beliefs and patterns. And another tool is to really go into, create yourself, if you can, in your house, a sacred, safe place that you can go and just meditate, tap into that self-love, and start building that strength up of that inner power and that connection to your heart, because that's where you're going to start finding your courage and finding your confidence to and then as you bring down your nervous system within that, and through breath work through that. So we do breath work with that as well.
Mm.
Then we can get our intuition. And when we calm the nervous system down, all the other organs function. So we can think properly, and the heart works, and the stomach works, and all these things come into alignment once we calm the nervous system down. And then we can hear the intuition saying, okay, you need to go here, you need to do this, or whatever it is. But when we're in flight, we don't hear anything.
What I want to talk about right now, and this is just off the top of my head, is in my situation when I was a teenager. I wasn't little when this was really bad. Is having an ally, and I didn't have an ally. Like my rest of my family went, oh no, it's not really happening. You know, you're making it up. You're just being a spoiled child. You know, and sometimes my grandmother could be my ally. My younger brother was an ally because he was definitely, but he was away. So can that ally be a friend or an aunt or a grandmother or a cousin? You know, would you suggest if children especially don't have an ally in the family or a friend, that what would you suggest they do? Go to like the kids phone, kids line?
Yeah, there's definitely a helpline on the phone. There's coming up on the screen. And when school's in, reach out to your teacher and reach out to those ones that can actually help and say, you know what, it's not safe at home. It's whatever it is. There's not a good environment for me there. And I love what you said about, you know, an aunt, an uncle. Believe it or not, in my second marriage, it was his parents that I ran down to stay with
Wow.
for a couple weeks, and then I'd go back up and, you know, just doing that return thing back and forth. But yeah, really finding a safe person just to even talk about it, you know, like it is a process. And as much as I know our friends want to like, well, just get out. It doesn't somehow happen that way. Some reason we stay in it till we're done. And when we're done, we're done. And that's when we draw the line in the sand and say enough. But
Yeah. And I think it's very important, and I find this a lot in my practice, when anybody's had any kind of bad experience, and it can be anything, not necessarily abuse, but just to validate. And that's what I didn't get. Nobody validated me. They all thought I was making it up. And, you know, in the end, you start to think, am I the crazy one? Am I making it up? So I think if there are people out there who are listening to this who are the allies, who or are like are even in doubt about, is my nephew making this up, are they telling stories, that they do at first go with validating and then see what comes out of that, rather than going with, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt first, rather than doubting them first. Does that make any sense, Darlene?
yeah.
I think that's so important. Did you get who validated you? You say your husband's parents?
Yeah, that was the second time. The first relationship, I didn't have anybody. It was nobody knew. Like he had me so isolated. I didn't really have one friend, but that was about it. I lived the daytime work. I was the happy-go-lucky girl, the nighttime nightmare, you know, in the evening time. And so that's kind of how it happens. But I did want to just mention one thing around this with kind of the secrecy part of things, is that some women are actually in relationships where their husband, or it can be the man with the woman, they are actually in a community figure. The person that is the abuser. So it could be a police officer, a politician, a firefighter, and it's very hard to actually speak up against, you know, about what's going on with those ones that have that authority figure in the community. And that piece, like you said, whether they even believe her, or they, you know, or their family members even believe her, because usually they have their own face they put out to the public, but it's a different story when you're at home alone.
You know, it also begs the question, is maybe in society, because abuse is so rampant and so hidden, that women who can do the rescuing, or anybody that can do the rescuing, the people that are being abused kind of need a secret code. You know, they need certain words to communicate so that we are on alert. Because if you're not, was there anybody in your world, that any other women that were looking at you and going, are you okay, Darlene? Or is something going on at home? Was anybody picking up on that?
No, but I
No.
do have one friend right now that can't even open any of my stuff. Like her guy checks her phone. He's abusive. She can't even look at anything that I have. Like we'll meet and I'll have a session. She'll have a session. What we share, you know, what we do. But then we can have a private conversation. But yeah, there's lots of people out there that just I didn't have anybody. I was just too terrified to, you know,
Yeah.
reach out.
What suggestion would you give to women now that there's more awareness and there are helplines? I mean, I know obviously not enough shelters by the sounds of things. How would you say to somebody right now that's in that situation just to get out and see what they can do?
Yeah, well, I think really calling that helpline, they would be able to just talk it out with somebody that can relate and understand and just give it a voice, because until we can speak it out, it's just locked inside of us and keeps us just stuck and frozen. So just being able to speak it out, a lot of times we're able to process it and be able to see through that vision of our words, our reality that's shining back at us, that what's happening really, you know, because then yeah, so,
Yeah.
and I think if you don't have somebody, do call that helpline. And they can also direct you into a community place that is able to help be a resource for you.
And I think we've got to empower, as women, we've got to empower each other anyway and
Yes.
really check in, right? So I didn't ask you this. What is the cycle? You talked about that. And does that have something to do with the shame, or what is the cycle?
Well, part of it, I guess, is just that normal way of being treated. When we've been in a codependency, and I'm not one, because I never sat there and said, oh, it's all his fault and I blame him. You know, like I did actually see that there was a mental issue. I knew my first husband had a very abusive childhood, ran away from home at 12 years old, and had a lot of stuff happen to him. So he was not able to process that and had a lot of anger built up. And then when he drank, then there wasn't anybody home, you know, like it didn't matter if it was me in front of him or anybody else. So
Right.
yeah, so it's a case of really kind of really being an observer of your situation so that you can really see what's happening on a deeper level.
Yeah. And I often ask people to step outside of themselves and be witness to themselves